La sessione general con Joël Poutas. Joël Poutas was an active researcher and nuclear physicist, specialist in electronics, and I had the honor and the opportunity to know him many years ago in constructing a very large device in nuclear physics. He was the inventor of this Indra detector. So since then, we discussed a lot about history of physics because Dr. Poutas is an enthusiastic follower of the history of physics since the beginning. Today, we speak about from open science to military secrets, the first years of nuclear fission. Thank you. You have 25 minutes, okay? Including 5 minutes of discussion. So fast. Thank you.
Buongiorno. My only word in Italian. I am sorry I see it because I have some problem in the back, but I will try. You see me, I'm a little bit small, but anyway. So thank you, Angelo, for your invitation, which gives me the opportunity and the pleasure to come again in Sicilia. The story of nuclear fission began in Berlin in December 1938 with a surprising discovery. In the chemical analysis of the products coming from the bombardment of uranium by neutrons, Hahn and Strassmann identified the presence of barium-like element. The atomic number of barium, 56, is too far from the 92, the one of uranium. On December 19, Otto Hahn wrote to his longtime colleague, Lise Meitner. Lise Meitner, an Austrian Jew, left Berlin in June 1938 and was a refugee in Sweden. At Christmas 1938, Lise Meitner and her nephew, the physicist Otto Frisch, found a possible interpretation of the phenomenon by the dynamic of the reaction and the deformation of the nucleus. They also calculated the very important energy release in this brick, this fission term introduced later by Otto Frisch in an analogy with the cell division in biology. The experimental results sent by Hahn on December 22nd to the German review Naturwissenschaften were published as early as January 6. The first interpretations sent by Frisch on January 16 were published in the English journal Nature on February 11, 1939. On his return to Copenhagen, where he was a refugee, Otto Frisch immediately informed his laboratory director, Niels Bohr, who was leaving for the United States to attend the 5th Washington Conference on Theoretical Physics. After private discussions, Bohr announced officially the news during the conference. As in Europe, this discovery surprised, and especially Enrico Fermi, who has just, excuse me, I have some problem. It's okay for you? Okay. So Enrico Fermi, who has just arrived in the United States on January 2nd, and who was a specialist in neutron reactions, a field that earned him the 1938 Nobel Prize in Physics. In January 1939, Frisch in Copenhagen, Joliot in Paris, Fermi in New York, quickly confirmed the existence of the phenomenon by direct measurements of the fission fragments in ionization chambers. Nuclear fission has generated a lot of publication. Soon, it was shown in different laboratories that this phenomenon also produced neutrons that could generate a chain reaction. The paper of Albin, Joliot, and Kowarski was published in Nature in March 1939, and the one of Anderson, Fermi, and Einstein in Physical Review in April. Few physicists worried. This was the case of the small community of Hungarian immigrants who had left Germany, and especially Leo Szilard. Szilard prepared a letter and convinced Einstein to send it on August 2nd, 1939, to President Roosevelt to alert him about the potential dangers of uranium fission. Despite international tensions, works and publications were going on. Published just 1 year after the discovery, the first review article contained already 140 references. The famous theoretical studies of Bohr and the young American Wheeler, entitled The Mechanism of Nuclear Fission, were published in Physical Review on the 1st of September 1939, the day of the invasion of Poland by Germany and the beginning of the war on European soil. Alerted by scientists, government funded organizations to develop national works on fission while keeping them secret. In Germany, a working group on nuclear physics was formed in April 1939. In September, it was replaced by an organization known as Uranverein, Uranium Club, first led by Kurt Diebner, a physicist and military advisor. Among the most active members was Heisenberg, who produced on the 6th of December 1939 the first part of a summary report on the possibility of technical production of energy. Heisenberg also participated in experiments in Leipzig, Berlin, and in southern Germany. At the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, 7 large-scale experiments were conducted by a small team around Karl Wirtz and Walter Bothe. In Gotha, Kurt Diebner built 3 experiments. In 1944, under the leadership of Walter Gerlach, the material from the Berlin experiment was transferred to the southwest Germany to form a larger setup in Egerloch. Here we see a reconstruction of the Egerloch at the Egerloch Museum of the German Uran machine. It contained 1.5 tons of heavy water and the same amount of uranium distributed in 64 cubes. The experiment ready in March 1945 did not have time to function, and as shown by modern simulations, it could not lead to a sustained chain reaction. In France, the small team, led by Frédéric Joliot, assisted by Francis Perrin, for the theory, undertook experiments on the chain reaction. They also used natural uranium and heavy water as a moderator. 3 patents on the production of energy were deposited in May 1939 and 2 others in the spring of 1940. They remained secret and were not issued until 1950. In France, the work on the fission stopped with the defeat of June 1940. In the UK, the organization began with the creation in June 1940 of the Maude Committee, which was set up to respond to the theoretical analysis conducted by Otto Frisch and the German immigrant Rudolf Peyers, who was also a professor in Birmingham. Their memorandum showed that a critical mass of only a few kilograms of pure uranium-235 would be enough for a bomb. The British research program took the code name of Tuballoys. In August 1943, in Quebec, Churchill and Roosevelt signed a collaboration agreement on nuclear power. James Chadwick, the neutron discoverer, coordinated the insertion of a group of scientists into the American project. In Canada, the Montreal Laboratory was created in 1942 to investigate different possibilities of reactor development based on heavy water as a moderator. British, French, and other European scientists like Pontecorvo contributed to the work. In 1944, the Chalk River laboratories were opened in Ontario to build large-scale experiments. The zero-energy experimental pile became critical on September 5, 1945. In the Soviet Union, the Uranium Committee was set up in June 1940 and later integrated in the GKO, the State Defense Committee, established following the German invasion of summer of 1941. Because of the war, few works were carried out except in the secret research center called the Laboratory Number 2, which was established in March 1943 in Moscow and directed by Igor Kurchatov. In April 1944, only 74 people, including 25 scientists, worked in his laboratory. The Soviet nuclear program really began on August 20, 1945, with the creation by Stalin of a special committee under the leadership of Beria. Beria, you know him probably, a politician well known for his terrible action at the head of the NKVD, the political police. Let us now go to finish by the United States, the most important country for the development of nuclear fission and its application during the war. In October 1939, President Roosevelt replied to Einstein and set up a uranium advisory committee, which was then integrated into a larger organization created in June 1940, the National Defense Research Committee. A year later, in June 1941, this committee was replaced by the Office of Scientific Research Development with the same director, Vannevar Bush. In this new organization, the Uranium Committee became the Uranium Section and simply the most discreet S1 with no mention of uranium. In the early 40s, fundamental research on fission continued in the United States, but with the gradual establishment of a control of publication. Significant examples can be found in the experiment performed at Berkeley, California, and particularly with the 60-inch cyclotron. Radiochemists, including the future Nobel laureates Edwin Macmillan and Glenn Seaborg, analyze the products obtained in the bombardment of uranium-238 by deuterium. They highlight the existence of elements of mass 238 and atomic number 93 and 94, which will be later called neptunium and plutonium. The paper on element 93, sent in May 1940, was published by Physical Review in June. However, the one on the element 94, sent in March 1941, was not published until April 1946. Why? In the meantime, other experiments had shown the existence of the isotope 239 of plutonium and its fissile character similar to that of uranium-235 and therefore potentially usable for a nuclear weapon. The two publications on this topic, sent to Physical Review in 1941, were also published after the war in 1946. Experiments were also carried out on the demonstration of the existence of the chain reaction in uranium. Here is a page dated November 3, 1941, from a Fermi notebook at Columbia University in New York. Fermi and his colleague chose carbon as a moderator. Carbon is less effective than heavy water for slowing down neutrons, but easier, much easier to obtain in its graphite form. In 1942, Arthur Compton managed to federate the American efforts around an experiment at the newly established secret laboratory in Chicago called the Metallurgical Laboratory. A large-scale experiment was installed under the stands of a football stadium and placed under the direction of Enrico Fermi. The setup, whose assembly began in mid-November 1942, consisted of a stack of 6 tons of metallic uranium, 45 tons of uranium oxide, and 360 tons of graphite. On December 2, 1942, in the presence of about 50 people, the first controlled chain reaction was obtained. The Chicago nuclear pile had been integrated into a military purpose project known as the Manhattan Project, in reference to the location of the first offices in New York in June 1942. Okay, I will not go into detail about the Manhattan Project, which is quite well known, but only mention a few highlights. Here is a map of the main places. We can immediately notice the dispersion over the whole US territory and the code names. The 3 main sites are Laboratory Y in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where the first bombs were studied and assembled. The largest number of physicists, of scientists, chemists, and other ones were in Los Alamos. Clinton Engineer works in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, for the production of enriched uranium. And Ford Engineer works in Hanford, near Richland, Washington, for the plutonium fabrication. Here is a graph established after the war. It represents the monthly employment rate for construction, operation, and on the different sites. I will not comment on the curve, but the maximum one. In only 2 years, the total employment reached the huge peak of 125,000 people in mid-1944. The 2 nuclear fuel fabrication, Oak Ridge and Hanford sites, were the largest employers. In Oak Ridge and Hanford, construction and operation were carried out by private industrial companies. Almost all the staff did not know the purpose of the project and behaved like normal employees in US industries, strike, and so on. On July 16, 1945, the first test of plutonium bomb was successfully carried out in the desert of New Mexico. On August 6, a uranium bomb called Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second plutonium bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. After the war, the vast majority of scientists involved in the Manhattan Project returned to fundamental research. This was the case of Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director of the Manhattan Project at Los Alamos. Oppenheimer left Los Alamos in October 1945 and returned to theoretical physics. In 1947, he was appointed director of the famous Princeton Institute for Advanced Study. In November 1947, in a lecture entitled Physics in the Contemporary World, Oppenheimer briefly returned to the war period and said, "The physicists have known sin, and this is a knowledge which they cannot lose." Thank you for your attention. The chairman, I respect the time, so the chairman was not there. Excuse me, Angelo.
It's an emergency, okay. You had, in principle, you had 5 minutes more. So
Yes,
thank you very much for your, yeah.
You say me 20 minutes.
Yeah, but you are a Frenchman, not the Dutch.
I am not German.
Okay, thank you very much for your very interesting talk, Joel, and we have room for few questions or comments concerning this special piece of history that inside the period of also racial law. It was Francesco. Okay.
You mentioned Kurt Liebner about the German project. Now, in the last years, there has been a rumor, not in the scientific academic literature, but in the general literature, that the reactor number 4 of Liebner Ringotto did reach criticity. Yeah.
So it was not an academic researcher, as you say. It was a researcher, and he said in his book that he has access to Soviet new documentation. Okay, but what we know, something very interesting after the war. After the war, there was the American ALSOS. ALSOS was a program to keep the German scientists on the German soil and to bring them in England, near Cambridge, for 6 months. So they arrive at the beginning of, you see, July and stay till January for 6 months. You see the name. You have very bad, Kurt Liebner. You have, of course, Werner Heisenberg. All these 9 scientists work on atomic programs. It was not exactly atomic bomb. It was atomic reactor. And what is very, except Max von Laue, we never worked on that. It was, we don't know why. And what is interesting, that has been registered all the time. You see, Heisenberg say, English never do that. They are too kind, too polite. No, there was register everywhere in this farm hall. And we have, for example, the reaction of those scientists, including Kurt Liebner, the one you mentioned, at Hiroshima bombing on 6 August 1945. They don't believe that the Americans were able to make atomic bomb. And they say clearly that the program was not more than research. So it's, I am sorry to tell that it's book you want to sell by saying something which is far from the reality. No, the German was not close to atomic bomb. They were even not close to a reactor. There is a book in French which says the same thing, coming from the book of this guide in German. So the German, and that was the reason why the refugees work on atomic bomb in States. Okay? And after, they say, we did not know that the Germans were not so advanced, but they know starting about 1944.
Can I give a little advertisement about something about these themes? Because this year a movie has been produced in the USA. It is not already available here. That the title is "The Catcher Was a Spy," and it speaks about that venture of the catcher is the baseball player, and maybe you know the episode of the American baseball player whose name is Bermo, and who became a spy for the USA and came in Europe to find out where Heisenberg was during the war. And he came in Italy, and he also interrogated 2 Italian physicists that were Edoardo Amaldi and Giancarlo Wick, and he was looking for Heisenberg, of course, because they thought to kill him. He was working at the German bomb, and this is a film I wanted to tell, and Giancarlo Giannini will interpret Edoardo Amaldi. It's this year. It's a this year film, so just
There will be a talk, I think, on Pontecorvo in 2 or 3 days. So Pontecorvo was in Canada. But in States, you have Enrico Fermi, but you have also Emilio Segre, who was in Canada working with, Emilio Segre was working on plutonium, yes. It was very important for the program. So you have Emilio Segre, we have Fermi, you have Pontecorvo in Canada, there is 2 of the Via Panisperna who stay in Italy, and 1 who was in England, I think. But there will be some consideration. But concerning that farm hall, you see there is Otto-Hahn. So I just finished, excuse me, on small story. We have in big story to tell small story. So Otto-Hahn, you see, Otto-Hahn was the one who discovered the fission. Okay? He received the Nobel Prize. He received the Nobel Prize for 1945. Nobody knows where was Otto-Hahn. So the committee of Nobel Committee gives the Nobel Prize to Otto-Hahn. They don't know where it was. We suspect that they give to him to know where he was. Because all those guys can receive information, papers, radio set, and so on, but cannot give outside information. So Otto-Hahn received his Nobel Prize in 1945 and go to Stockholm only the year after. So it's confirmed that German was okay. Thank you. Thank you for the comment.